There is a version of you that has never been allowed to exist. Not because it isn't real, because at some point, early and under pressure, you can barely remember now, you decided it was too dangerous to be. Too much. Too aggressive. Too ambitious. Too strange. Too hungry for things that the people around you didn't think you were supposed to want. And so you buried it. You became reasonable. You became manageable. You became the person who doesn't want too much, doesn't push too hard, doesn't make others uncomfortable with the size of what they're reaching for. You made yourself smaller and called it maturity. Here's what nobody told you. Everything you buried went somewhere. It didn't dissolve. It didn't weaken. It organized. It built pressure. And it has been running underneath your decisions, your relationships, your ambitions, and your failures for years. Not as your enemy, but as the most potent and completely untapped resource you have ever had access to. Carl Jung called it the shadow. And what he understood about it, what took him decades to map with precision, is that the people who learn to face it don't just heal. They become formidable. They develop a quality of presence, of drive, of creative power that the people still running from their shadow can't explain and can't compete with. Not because they became darker, because they became whole. This is not a video about therapy. It is not a video about healing your inner child or processing your past. It is a video about what happens to your capacity for success when you stop spending the majority of your psychological energy keeping half of yourself locked in the dark. Before anything else, the shadow needs to be defined correctly, because the word has been misused enough that most people arrive at it with a picture that is almost entirely wrong. The shadow is not the worst version of you. It is not the violent impulse, the selfish thought, the thing you'd be most ashamed to admit in public. Those things may be in it, but Jung's definition was far more precise and far more interesting than that. The shadow is not what is evil in you, it is what is unacceptable. And those are completely different things. The shadow is the totality of everything you rejected about yourself in order to become the person you decided you were. Every quality that was too much for the environment you grew up in. Every impulse that was penalized, every desire that was called wrong, dangerous, arrogant, selfish, or simply inconvenient to the people who needed you to be something specific. Piece by piece, you learned what was permitted, and piece by piece, you excised everything that wasn't. Here is what makes this crucial for anyone who wants to understand success. The shadow does not only contain darkness, it contains whatever was unacceptable. And in most of the people watching this, what was unacceptable was not only the anger, the selfishness, the aggression. It was also the ambition that looked like arrogance, the confidence that looked like vanity, the hunger that looked like greed, the competitive drive that made other people uncomfortable, the refusal to shrink that nobody in the room knew what to do with. Jung called this the golden shadow. The positive qualities that were split off and repressed, not because they were wrong, but because they were dangerous to the relationship and environments that required your smallness. Your power went into the shadow alongside your rage. Your creative force went in alongside your envy. The qualities that would have made you most capable of building something real were buried in the same place as the things you're most ashamed of. This is the central fact that changes everything. The shadow is not the obstacle to your success. For most people, it is the primary source of the energy that success requires, and it is currently locked away, spending itself not on what you're trying to build, but on the enormous psychological labor of staying suppressed. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Jung was precise about what suppression actually costs, and the number is staggering once you understand it clearly. Every quality you've pushed into the shadow requires ongoing energy to keep there. Not the energy of a one-time decision, the energy of constant maintenance. The psyche does not suppress something once and move on. It maintains the suppression continuously, the way a person might hold a door shut against something pushing from the other side. The moment attention is withdrawn, the pressure returns. This means that a significant portion of the psychological energy you have available at any given moment is already spoken for, already consumed by the labor of keeping the shadow contained. This is not a metaphor. It is a measurable drain on the resource that everything you want to build depends on: your focus, your drive, your creative capacity, your ability to take risks and sustain effort under pressure. All of it draws from the same reservoir. And that reservoir has a slow, permanent leak running directly into the maintenance of your own suppression. Think about what that means in practical terms. The person who has integrated their shadow is not just psychologically healthier, they have more available energy than the person who hasn't. Not because they are more talented or more disciplined, because they are not spending half their capacity keeping themselves from themselves. Jung described the libido, psychic energy, as the fundamental resource of psychological life, and he was unambiguous about what shadow integration does to it. When the energy that was locked in suppression is freed through integration, it becomes available for everything else. The creative work that used to feel like pulling teeth begins to flow. The ambition that used to arrive, wrapped in guilt, begins to move cleanly. The drive that used to exhaust itself before it reached the goal begins to sustain itself past the point where it used to collapse. This is the mechanism. This is why the people who have done this work seem to have more of something, more presence, more output, more willingness to take up space and push through difficulty. They didn't acquire something new. They reclaimed something that was always theirs and stopped spending it on suppression. Before you can use the shadow as a resource, you need to understand exactly how it operates as a saboteur, because it has been running this function in your life with extraordinary efficiency, and most of it has been completely invisible to you. The first mechanism is self-sabotage. This is the shadow's most devastating tool and the most misunderstood. You get close to something you want, a level of success, a relationship that could be real, a version of your life that finally fits, and something in you dismantles it. Not dramatically, quietly. A decision you make at exactly the wrong moment. A pattern of behavior that reliably produces the same result. An opportunity you don't follow through on in a way you can never quite explain afterward. The shadow doesn't sabotage you out of malice. It sabotages you out of loyalty to the self-image that decided long ago that you weren't the kind of person who got to have that thing. Success beyond a certain level becomes threatening when it contradicts the unconscious identity you built around staying manageable, staying small, staying within the range that the people who shaped you could accept. The shadow enforces that ceiling not with obvious resistance, but with subtle, perfectly timed interventions that look from the inst like mistakes, like bad luck, like simply not being ready yet. Every person carries an unconscious threshold for how much success, happiness, and aliveness they are permitted to experience. When life moves above that threshold, something in the psyche pulls it back down. The mechanism is the shadow, enforcing the limits of an identity that was built for a different and smaller version of what was possible. The second mechanism is projection. The shadow cannot stay entirely contained. It leaks outward, and it attaches itself to people and situations in the external world with a precision that feels like perception, but is actually displacement. The competitor whose success fills you with the disproportionate and uncomfortable emotion. The person in your field who seems to move with a freedom and confidence that provokes something in you that isn't quite admiration. The qualities you judge most harshly in others, the arrogance, the ruthlessness, the shameless self-promotion. These reactions are the shadow speaking. They are pointing with extraordinary accuracy at the qualities you've repressed in yourself. And as long as those qualities are out there, living in other people, they are not in here, working for you. The third mechanism is fragmented focus. The person whose shadow is unintegrated is not fully behind anything they do. Part of them is always managing the suppression. Part of them is always monitoring for the places where the real self might leak through at the wrong moment. This produces a quality of divided attention that undermines everything requiring sustained commitment. The work is never quite whole because the person doing it never quite is. Here is where everything shifts. Because once you understand that the shadow is not what needs to be overcome, but what needs to be reclaimed, the entire question of success reorients around a completely different set of priorities. The qualities most reliably associated with extraordinary achievement across every field, the ones that separate the people who build something real from the ones who remain permanently on the edge of it, are almost universally the qualities that end up in the shadow. Not in everyone, but in the people who were shaped by environments that penalized these qualities early. Aggression, ruthlessness in the service of a vision, the capacity to disappoint people when the work demands it. Ambition that doesn't apologize for itself. The refusal to make yourself smaller to make others more comfortable. Competitive hunger that doesn't dress itself up as something polite. These are not dark qualities in any meaningful sense. They are the engine of nearly every significant achievement in human history. And they are sitting in the shadow of most people who grew up in environments where expressing them carried a cost, where being too ambitious was called selfish, where being too confident was called arrogant, where wanting too much was called greedy, where the drive to win was called unkind. Integrating the shadow does not mean becoming cruel. It does not mean unleashing the worst of yourself on the people around you. Jung was precise about this. Integration is not expression. It is not acting on every suppressed impulse. It is withdrawing the energy you've been spending on repression and making it consciously available. It is the difference between a quality that runs you from below, producing self-sabotage and projection and invisible ceilings, and a quality you can choose when the situation calls for it and set down when it doesn't. The integrated person has access to their aggression without being controlled by it. They can be ruthless when the work requires it without it leaking into relationships where it causes damage. They can be fiercely ambitious without the guilt that turns ambition into self-sabotage. They can compete without the unconscious need to lose that keeps the ceiling in place. This is the resource. This is what shadow integration unlocks. Not permission to be worse. Permission to be more fully yourself in the service of whatever you're trying to build. The work is not complicated. It is not easy. But it is specific, and specific is useful. The first step is identification. You need to find where your shadow lives, and the shadow leaves evidence everywhere. Your projections are the primary material. Start with the people who provoke a disproportionate reaction in you. Not mild irritation, real heat. The specific quality that provokes you, stripped of the story about why the other person is wrong, is almost always something that lives in your shadow. The arrogance that disgusts you, the ambition that makes you uncomfortable, the way someone takes up space without apologizing. These are not verdicts about them. They are dispatches about you. Write them down. Name the quality precisely. Then ask where in your own life that quality exists. Suppressed, unacknowledged, performing as its opposite. Do the same with admiration. The people you admire most intensely, not casually, intensely, are carrying something that belongs to you. The specific quality that produces that particular ache of recognition is your golden shadow looking back at you through someone else's life. Name it. Take it seriously as information about your own unlocked capacity, not as a verdict about their superiority. The second step is confrontation. This is where most people stop because it requires something that identification never does: the willingness to sit with what you find without immediately explaining it away. When you've identified a shadow quality, the ego will immediately offer alternative explanations. It will remind you of legitimate reasons the other person deserves the reaction. It will insist that this particular case really is just about them. Learn to recognize that insistence as the signal, not the conclusion. Confrontation happens in the body before it happens in the mind. When you sit with a projection you've identified and feel the pull to justify it, stay. Let the discomfort exist without resolving it into narrative. This is the moment the shadow begins to shift from an autonomous force operating below your awareness into something known. And what is known can be worked with. The third step is reclamation. For each quality you find in the shadow, ask what it would look like to make it consciously available, not to perform it, not to unleash it, to have access to it. The aggression that has been producing conflict in your closest relationships because it has no other outlet. What would it look like redirected as drive? As the capacity to push through resistance in the work when everything in you wants to stop. The ambition that has been producing self-sabotage because it was never allowed to move cleanly. What would it look like as a specific, unapologetic commitment to the level of achievement you have been privately reaching for and publicly pretending you're fine without? The reclamation is not a single moment. It is a practice of repeatedly choosing to let the quality be present in contexts where it serves you, rather than allowing it to run underground where it only undermines you. Each time you make that choice, the shadow loses a little of its autonomous power. Each time you let yourself be ambitious without guilt, competitive without apology, assertive without immediately softening it into something easier for others to receive, you are withdrawing a little more of the energy that was locked in suppression and putting it back into your life. The fourth step is to stop donating your qualities to other people. Every time you look at someone who has what you want and locate the difference between you and them entirely outside yourself, in their circumstances, their connections, their luck, their willingness to be ruthless in ways you've decided you're above, you are handing your own shadow to them and calling it analysis. The person whose success provokes that specific, uncomfortable feeling is almost never doing something you are incapable of. They are doing something you decided was not permitted for you. That decision was made in a context that no longer exists, under pressure from people whose opinions no longer need to govern your life. It can be unmade. Jung spent his career mapping the territory of the human psyche, not as an academic exercise, but because he understood something that the surface level of modern achievement culture consistently misses. The obstacle to most people's success is not external. It is not resources or circumstances or the behavior of other people. It is the enormous, silent, continuously operating effort to remain only half of what they actually are. The person who integrates their shadow does not become dangerous. They become whole. And wholeness has a quality that partial people still maintaining the performance of their own acceptability, cannot match and often cannot understand. It is the quality of someone who is fully behind what they're doing, who has stopped negotiating with themselves about whether they're allowed to want what they want, who can bring the full force of everything they are to the thing they're trying to build instead of spending half of that force on the maintenance of a self-image that was designed for someone else's comfort. Jung wrote that the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, not because it is immoral, but because facing it requires a degree of honesty that the ego will do almost anything to avoid. The ego wants coherence. It wants the story of you to hold together, and the shadow, by definition, is everything that story left out. The work of integration is the work of expanding the story, of becoming large enough to contain the parts of yourself that were inconvenient, threatening, too much, not so that you become someone different, so that you finally become someone whole. The success available to a whole person is categorically different from the success available to someone still managing their own suppression. Not because the world rewards wholeness, it often doesn't, at least not immediately, but because the person who is no longer at war with themselves has something that the divided person never has. The full weight of everything they are, moving in one direction, without the invisible hand of the shadow pulling them back toward the ceiling that was never really theirs to begin with. You already know which parts of yourself you've been keeping locked away. You've known for longer than you'd like to admit. The only question worth asking now is how much longer you intend to spend your only life protecting other people from the full version of you. The shadow does not ask to be celebrated. It asks to be seen. And the life available to you on the other side of that seeing, not perfect, not painless, but entirely and unapologetically yours, begins the moment you stop pretending it isn't there.